Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Healthy Indoors Show. I'm Bob Krell, publisher of Healthy Indoors magazine. We've got an interesting show again today. Joining us live from Ottawa, Canada, coming across the border, is Donald Weeks. Don Weeks has worked for 45 years in the environmental and occupational health field in the U.S. and Canada, and his specialties include indoor air quality investigations, mold inspections, and he spells that with a U, project designs and remediation monitoring, and post-remediation verification, asbestos and lead paint inspection, project specification and abatement and post-abatement monitoring. He's an AIHA fellow, a certified industrial hygienist, and a certified safety professional who most recently worked for In Air Environmental Limited in Ottawa, Ontario. He is now retired, lucky guy, and works on volunteer efforts full-time. Don attended New York University for his master's in occupational safety and health, and he's a former chair of the AIHA Indoor Environmental Quality Committee, past vice president for practitioners for ISIAC, and a co-editor of the AIHA Mold Green Book published in 2008. He is currently on the ACGIH Board of Directors, and he is also the president of the IEQ GA. And honestly, Don, I don't know what that is.
Well, that's
why don't we start with that? IEQ GA. I'm like, I don't know that one.
All right, Bob. Great. Good to see you guys, you and Joe.
And,
basically, the IEQ GA is the Indoor Environmental Quality Global Alliance. And it's an effort that was initially started by Bill Bonfleck when he was president of ASHRAE. And it's been going on for about 5 years. We just, last year in November, we incorporated as a corporation, a nonprofit corporation in Belgium. We have organizational members. So ASHRAE, AIHA, ACGIH are all members, as well as organizations from Europe, India, from Singapore, and from we're getting into South America at this point. So the idea is to build an international coalition of organizations that have an interest in indoor air quality, and to then present data to the field as a whole. One of our first efforts was a position statement issued at the end of March, talking about the fact that we believed as a group that there was airborne transmissions of COVID-19. So this is going back to the initial letter that Lydia Maraska and John Melton sent to WHO, saying you're ignoring a very important part of what's going on with COVID-19. And we were one of the early organizations, because of the different organizations that are part of the IEQ GA, we were able to put in a very early statement to WHO and on our website about the position that yes, airborne transmission was a very key area to look into. And as you know, it took until July for them to actually acknowledge that. In the meantime, there's been a lot of interesting data that's been assembled, and a lot of it is through members of the organizations that we are working with. And so I'm looking to hopefully write a book, or at least shall we say, edit a book on indoor environmental quality, which I think is going to be coming up very shortly as a major way in which to deal with new buildings.
You don't sound very retired. You just and I neglected again to acknowledge our co-pilot, co-host, Joe Medosh, the provocateur and healthy building scientist from Hayward Score. Hi, Joe. Good to see you.
Here.
You weren't here last week, so I forgot about you. You weren't in my show notes for this week because you weren't there last week.
Yes. So Don, my initial comment on what you just talked about as the rest of the world organizing about this is, I think that's one of the things that us as the United States have opted out of, based upon our results and what's happened. So I don't know if I understand those organizations are here, but it seems as though that's the kind of thing that we may have opted out of. We've defunded the WHO and a variety of other stuff in many ways. So it sounds as though we wanted nothing to do with how well you guys organize yourself otherwise. So that's just
leadership.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I would counter that to say that it is the scientists and the techs and the academics that are basically organizing. Do they pay that much attention to the political side of it? No, they don't. They just work together as organizations. So if I need a quote on nanoparticles, I can call up or email Lydia Maraska in Australia. If I need some information about airborne transmission of what happened during the SARS epidemic, I can call or email Hugo Lee in Hong Kong and get information about the Elmore Gardens feel. The advantage of having an international organization like this is we don't really care about politics. We care about the science. And I think that will be a big difference as we go forward.
What's
I'm
your
a believer.
mission statement? I was gonna say,
Yeah.
what's your mission statement with the organization? Is it to disseminate information just to the global scientific community, or is it to the industry, or is it to like all the way down to like just consumers?
Well, it's intended to be mainly for individuals that are a member of these organizations, but the way in which we disseminate our information, obviously everybody has a web page nowadays, so we do that. But in addition to that, we're going to be participating as a sponsor for the postponed conference on indoor air quality. That's being done by ASHRAE. It has been done since 1985, I think. It's going to be in Greece in 2021 in September. And we have, when we were setting this up initially, we were getting responses from 45 different countries who were sending scientists to there to participate in this. So I anticipate that kind of conference, which is held every couple of years, will be the type of thing that the IEQ GA will be very much involved with going forward. The webpage, I think, is www.ieq-ga.org, I believe. If I don't have that right, I'll send it to you once we get off the show.
Perfect. We'll get that up on the site.
So that's one of my efforts. But that's just I just happen to be president at that. That one is one that I've been involved with for the last 5 years. The last 3 years, I've been involved with the American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists, which Joe had asked me to talk a little bit about that because I think it's an important organization. It actually predates AIHA by 1 year, which we're very proud of. We actually started forming in 1938, and it has been going on ever since then. And one of the key items that everybody should be aware of is the threshold limit values that they publish on a yearly basis, the TLVs. They were used in 1972 by OSHA to set the PELs. Unfortunately, OSHA has not been able to successfully update those numbers. However, we do every year. We update our TLVs and BELs, the biological exposure indices, on a yearly basis, and it's done by our technical committees that deal with those issues, and then it comes up to the full board. So every year we vote in December to update the various TLVs that have been presented by the committees. We also do physical, problems or issues, I should say, such as ergonomics, radiation, noise. Those are also part of the TLV booklet as well. So you can, if you haven't been familiar with them up to date, you should definitely look into them because I think, as I said, I think they're really the most recent information that is available on the various chemicals that are out there, as well as the other problems. Recently, we've revived the Bioaerosols Committee. I'm sure, Bob, you remember a book called Bioaerosols.
It's right over here, actually.
Yeah.
It's a nice red cover.
I have a copy.
I've cited that
Yeah.
so many times in expert witness testimony. I can't tell you. That's my one of my go-to authoritative sources.
Absolutely, and it has been since 1999, so it does need to be updated. So the Bioaerosols Committee is in the process of updating that book, and we should hope to have it out in the next year or two. It's a major effort, obviously, to update something of that nature, but we feel it's very important to do that. Sherry Marsham from Oklahoma and is the chair. Jack Springston, who you know very well, is the vice chair. And they have an active group that meet about once a month to discuss updating the chapters as we go forward. So I'm looking forward to seeing that book come out in the next couple of years.
I want to ask one question about your threshold limits. That most threshold limits that are out there are for the installer or the person on site, not the actual occupant has a greater exposure over long term. Can you explain briefly your role in that as a difference between installer versus occupant?
Yeah, I think the TLVs were originally set up for industrial facilities. And so they're 8-hour standards. And so it's exposure for 8 hours, 40 hours a week type of standards. They were not intended to be for consumers. You're right. Buildings are not necessarily the preview of the TLVs, and really, quite frankly, not either of the PELs as well from OSHA. There are other standards that are set up for that for various organizations like EPA, or in some cases, some state agencies. Here in Ontario, for example, the Ontario Ministry of Labor sets the standards on a yearly basis as well. So, but they're really intended for more of the workplace than they are for the consumer in their home or in other places of that nature.
Great, thanks.
And ACGIH, it's interesting because I think Joe raised it, when Joe raised that in the pre-talk, that, what's the difference between that and AIHA? And quite a distinct difference, really. But there are industrial hygienists involved in both.
Well, yes, there are industrial hygienists. When I came up, a long time ago, recognizing that I'm one of the older gentlemen in this area, 45 years ago, you were expected to join both. That was just part of the what you did to become an industrial hygienist. And really, the way I look at it is there's another group that's involved that used to be known as ABIH, and it's now global something. I forget what it is, but ABIH is absorbed into it. They were involved with the CIH designations, and they were set up by AIHA back in the 1960s to as a separate body for that particular purpose. So ABIH is really for professionalism. That you want to show that you're a CIH. AIHA is for the professionals. You're a member of the profession. ACGIH is for the profession itself. It's setting up the standards for the profession. So it shows where you should be going, what you should be doing, what do you need to know in order to do a full evaluation of the facility that you're looking at. So it's really a separate in that regard. Those three organizations work together very closely, but they do have separate reasons why they exist.
Thanks for clarifying that, because I think that's for a lot of the viewers. It's I believe it's probably an area that people can't really define. I've been in the industry 34 years, and I couldn't have given a succinct answer as you did anyway. But so Joe was showing a graphic there, or were you showing that?
No, I brought up to the page. Yeah.
Thank you, Joe, for doing that. I appreciate it. We do need members, as all organizations do. The COVID-19 has created some problems for us. We run a course called Fundamentals of Industrial Ventilation. It's considered the best industrial ventilation course in the world. It's a 5-day course, and we get people from all over the world to attend that course. But during COVID-19, we haven't been able to run that particular course. Our next potentially scheduled date is September. But we almost always sell out. We get approximately 40 to 50 people each time that we run that course, and we run it 3 or 4 times a year. So it does make a difference. You can see now we're running the summer series, which is I'm involved with as well. But September 20th through 25th, the fundamentals in industrial ventilation and practical applications of useful equations is being given in Chicago at the Marriott, right at the airport. So you don't even have to go into town. And basically, it is the best course. But we have special precautions for individuals that are going to be attending that course. Everybody has to wear a respirator. We're going to be doing temperature checks. We're going to do physical separation. To be able to run this course, we need to basically also bring in equipment to show people how ductwork actually works and what do you have to do in order to make it work correctly. So it's a very important part of what we do. And unfortunately, we haven't been able to do that since March. We're hoping to be able to do these courses over the course of the fall.
And ACGIH has been running a summer online
That's right,
series.
The summer series,
series, which has been good. You actually got me invited to that, and I did a presentation there, I think 3 weeks ago. Everything's starting to blur together. It's all these online presentations, but it's becoming more of I think a norm. Whereas like a year ago, it was pretty far-fetched to do things online and have this real distance learning environment, for what would normally be in-person educational opportunities in the industry. And I think now it's becoming a little more commonplace.
I'll give you an example for myself personally. In January, I was invited to come to India to do a presentation. I unfortunately didn't have the correct visa, so I didn't get to make the trip. But so they wanted me in person in India to give a presentation. In June, they called me up and wanted a webinar on the same subject. So I have now given one in India, in Singapore, and the most exotic place of all, Nebraska. And and now we're going to be giving ones also in the fall. I'm going to be doing one of the summer series ones as well on the mold analysis, which I had done some of that also at the IEQ meeting back in January, which seems like ancient history at this point.
But the bonus that happens, Don, is we all think about is that there's so many great presentations where people do live, and I can maybe get your slides, but I don't know what you really are talking about. These webinars are now a great documentation of educational opportunities that, you know, have been recorded for the first time in all of our careers. We haven't really been documenting what we talk about. So I think that's great that we're stuck doing this, because now other people can go back and watch some of the stuff that your great knowledge has been able to share. So there's a bonus to this challenge of doing things virtual, is that we now can go back and reference these things.
And it's
absolutely.
You know,
and I think it also means that basically we are probably going to incorporate this into anything that goes forward. So any conference, any webinars, any type of training that we're going to do, this is going to be a major part of what we do.
So you're gonna add like basically hybrid events when you see us getting back in person, which is something we've been doing with Healthy Indoors for a while. We've been, you know, live streaming from in-person events over the years. So this is kind of not unusual territory in our wheelhouse. But it's interesting that when you do a class, like I've been doing online training for about 5 years now, and have a class where I have like 3 people from Melbourne, Australia, and then have some people from like Georgia and New York all in the same class. It is really weird.
Well, not only is it like
it just makes the world seem so much smaller, though. You know,
but it's also it's a green thing that, you know, people aren't getting in an airplane to go somewhere, and, you know, all the challenges that go along with the impact, that we're now be like, you know what, I got just as much out of it for the most part. In fact, you can get more. I can chat with you as we're talking. Those are great things that we could never do otherwise.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that I like about the presentations is the chat room. Some of the participants have excellent questions that are really important, but don't necessarily get normally asked, because you're kind of fumbling around, or I don't want to stand up in front of everybody to make this, to make this comment.
Right.
But now they do it on the chat room, and it works very, very well.
Yeah, I mean, that's even true for training too. Like I'm really a firm believer in like the live face-to-face, or not face-to-face, but virtual face-to-face training, like using the Zoom platform. We've been using Zoom since it came out, where you get to see, the instructor sees the students. The problem when you do just solely based webinar stuff, and I'm not saying that's bad, but it's one directional with the exception of maybe a chat box. And it seems like that's okay for short presentations for an hour, 90 minutes. But if you're actually delivering training, per se, where you're, 8-hour class, it's really hard to be a student on the back end of that class just listening to a voiceover PowerPoint for 8 hours, and not, you're not getting.
There is such a thing as PowerPoint fatigue after a while. I think all of us feel it after, having done things like, for a full day being on a screen. But I do think that the younger, newer people coming into the field, that's how they're learning. I mean, I have an 18-year-old, 19-year-old who's going his second year in engineering course. He's doing it. He's my stepson. He's doing it by virtual, and these are not simple equations that he's working on. These are quadratic equations that he's working on, and he's doing all sorts of work in that regards. And yes, it's difficult, but he's got himself 2 screens so he can look at both of them. And he's he interacts with the prof by email or by text. Mm-hmm. So there is ways of doing it. There's our book.
So I want to get off training. Let's talk about why you're here and the thing. So Bob and I both have had this book for as long as I've been in the industry. It's the first one of the books you had to get, and believe me, it set me back a little bit. But there are several pages that are highlighted, tabbed, and quoted in many of the things I've written up. I know that Bob uses this as a Bible also. So most people may or may not be familiar with this, or like this is one of those, oh yeah, it's on my shelf because I saw other people got it. So why don't you explain the impact that this has had on our industry, because this is the one place where you can be like, you could quote this in court as a defense mechanism, is what many people I know have used. So if you could explain more about this.
Yeah, the bioaerosols book came out in 1999. It was written by the Bioaerosols Committee of ACGIH, and you can see the ACGIH logo on the bottom there at the time. This book was one of the first books that came out and talked about the problems with microbial contamination in buildings, and talked about how do you go about detecting it, what do you do in terms of recognizing it, what do you do to evaluate it, and how do you basically control it. And then, of course, remediation. You also want to be in the position to do appropriate remediation. These have the top experts in the field who are involved with the book. One of them that I'm sure you know is Phil Morey, but David Miller, a whole bunch of other people who were very, very top-notch people, spent a lot of time putting this book together. Now, it was not expected to be a one-off. It was supposed to be updated on a regular basis. And unfortunately, that did not occur for a variety of reasons we don't need to get into right now. But basically, it is going to be updated now. And it is, because the book is still continues to sell very well, you do see it almost everywhere in any course that talks about microbial contamination. They refer to the bioaerosols book as being one of the Bibles of this industry. If we go back and recall, 1999 was pre Dripping Springs, Texas. Okay,
right.
We're talking about going back before the mold mania that took place in the early 2000s. So this book really kind of set the standard as to what you have to look for and how you go about dealing with mold in buildings, particularly in housing, but also in other types of buildings as well.
I have one feedback, and Carl Grimes uses this book as a reference when people talk about there's a indoor, outdoor, how to do mold sampling, a comparison. He says there's one condition in there. It says that it's when the occupant no longer experiences challenges or issues. That's actually in the book as a reference to be like, you've remediated it when the occupant says, I no longer have a reaction. So
yes.
That is something that hardly anybody uses or is concerned about. They're like, you know what? I did my test. I got a clearance test here. It says there's no more spores, but the person still is having reactions. And Carl is quick to be like, well, the same book you just referenced, it also says that it's the occupant who says you finished and completed this job. And nobody really wants to stand behind that or understand that it's the occupant is the why you did it and make sure that they're actually have been successful.
Well, that's a hard litmus test.
It is. Right?
It means you actually provide some value and resolve an issue.
And you interacted with the occupant. You're right.
Yeah, I mean that's basically was the way in which these scientists and experts started in this field. Yes, sampling was part of it, but the main thing was basically open up your eyes and look. I remember I think it was Phil Morey who basically said the most important instrument that I bring onto a site is the flashlight, and basically looking in every dark corner and underneath the building and in above by the roof or whatever else I might need to look for. That's what he used as the primary way in which he evaluated buildings. Yes, he did sampling, and in some cases he got in trouble for doing too much sampling. That was what he was known for. But basically, the main thing that we looked at and did is a thorough evaluation, a thorough inspection of the building, and that has been the bedrock for bioaerosols all the way through to this day. Is that's what it's looking for: occupant satisfaction with what took place.
Well, I think the flashlight, it's his brain. The flashlight just allowed his brain to do the work. So yeah, right.
I agree.
And I can testify to the fact I had the opportunity to work with Phil on several projects back during the early mold rush, and we got called in because we had been doing a lot of remediation in the 90s, before a lot of companies got in it, and we were involved in this project in upstate New York. It was new construction, like 6-month-old building that was under construction, multi-family assisted home living complex, and the place was just flooded with water underneath. And like he was picking off like spore trap counts, I think like 10 million per cubic meter, like I mean, like numbers that you can't even, they're not even reasonable numbers. But honest to God, Dr. Phil Morey and I got in Tyvek suits, PAPRs, and crawled under this building. And I'm thinking to myself, Phil, I can go down and pull those samples for you, dude. It's like, and that was when I was like 40. Like, I'm not really comfortable you climbing down in there and crawling through the mud on your hands and knees, for like 200 yards. And he really did. I was so impressed with him because he was just like, he was a leader in the industry and did some amazing stuff, but actually would get his hands dirty, which was pretty cool.
Well, he was a mentor to me and to many of the industrial hygienists in the field, including a lot of remediators as well. And I should put in a little plug for the AIHA Phil Morey Scholarship Fund. We got that started a couple of years ago, and we are able to give scholarships to the last 2 years to students. One in Baltimore and one in St. Louis, So if you have an extra dollar, just give it to the Phil Morey Scholarship Fund. It would be certainly well appreciated.
Excellent. So, I mean, so you mentioned, 45 years in the industry. First of all, you look good for that. And now we're all old people, which I'm really troubled by, Don. That's one thing this show, doing the live weekly show, is, had the opportunity to, meet up with a lot of people I've known in the industry forever on the show. And it just keeps illustrating the fact that we've been doing this a long time.
Well, I was on last week with 2020, Clean 2020, and I had a young industrial hygienist from AIHA there. She couldn't have been more than maybe 35 years old. And I told her, I said, I'm so glad to see you. She said, I am so very, very tired of doing these types of things. It's good to have somebody young actually picking up the next string. And I do think there's a fair number of young people that are interested in this field. I think after COVID-19, maybe another one of the good things that might happen is that kids start looking at STEM much more than they did before in terms of education, and industrial hygiene and health and safety and indoor air quality may be top priorities in that regard. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the next generation does.
So you really think that, well, I mean, I think you're right. This could be a catalyst to spur more people in. But, prior to the pandemic, I was noticing, I had the opportunity to, I was presenting down at IEQ GA down in Florida in February, right before this really hit heavy. And it just, looking out at the audience, it was interesting. There wasn't a lot of young people in the audience. It was a lot of, I felt like, again, like, wow, is there interest? I mean, do you think there is?
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, I'm a little surprised, Bob, since you've been involved with online training for so long. Look at your online training individuals and see what age group they belong in. That's where they're getting their information. They're not going to conferences. Right. I mean, it's nice for us to go to conferences and see our old friends and, have a drink or two and that's all great, but that's not what young people do. They go online. And so I think there's going to be a change in that, in the whole convention atmosphere. I don't think it's going to be that way anymore. And some of these larger shows may actually start to go down. And you have to do them virtually. I mean, there's attempts to do that now with expos, virtual expos, where people advertise their goods. Will that be successful? It better be, because that's where the people are getting their information. I have to say, I have not been in a department store in probably 2 or 3 years. I have absolutely no reason to go to a department store. What do? I go online, order stuff from Amazon or some other source, and my stepson, I mentioned 18, he had to get a whole bunch of stuff for his electrical engineering degree. He didn't go to Best Buy he or one of these other, he ordered it online and was delivered the next morning. Why would he go out and do something like that? So I think you may be right that they won't be showing up at conventions, but they'll get their information other ways.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you're going to see that too. You're going to see those live. I think combination of when we do get to live events again, you're going to see the hybrids. I think they're going to be a lot more accepted.
Yeah, we had AIH on, and I told them that they needed to come up with a cool advertisement or a YouTube channel that talks about what industrial hygienists do as investigative, because there was a time when all of those CI shows, or in fact they're still on probably, but when those were active, the community colleges that did most of the education with that, they were booked up. In fact, you had to wait a year to get into one of those classes just because they saw it on TV and they're like, that's exciting, I want to get into that. So we need to promote industrial hygienists as solving the COVID crisis and helping people, and showing up at a crime scene where COVID has been. I'm telling you, those are the things that people they latch onto and I want to do that, and
I'm
they
not
do.
seeing a compelling show with Don Weeks and Joe Madash and Bob Krell crawling around in buildings, and anybody's going to want to watch that.
Well, guess what?
Wait a minute. We're doing a show right now, though. Wait a second.
No, we have somebody
not
play
on
our
CBS,
roles.
Though.
Yeah, we get somebody young and sexy and cool to play our roles, and you got to
you got to get Tom Cruise to do something on this, or somebody else that's really young. But yeah, they could do that. But I mean, I think the interesting thing is AIHA is doing something called IMIH, which you may have talked to Larry about. But in addition to doing that kind of campaigning among kids, and they're putting a lot of effort into that, they're also doing comic books. I don't know if you've seen their comic books, but I participated in one of them that was about indoor air quality, about investigating an abandoned hospital and going down into the basement and then being overcome by some kind of fumes of some sort, and then getting a real industrial hygienist to come in and do the testing. So they are trying to make those efforts to get people to that are younger to get involved in this particular field. And I think it also is economic driven. I mean, let's face it, if you can't get a job as, working as an engineer in building another oil field here in Canada, you're going to do something different. You're going to go into environmental. If you can't get a job as an electrical engineer because the grids are already being torn down for some other way of getting electricity, you might go into green buildings and start figuring out how to do energy in that regard. So I think there's going to be a change. I keep telling people this really isn't 2020. By the COVID-19 standards, we're really at 2030 right now. We've skipped a whole decade ahead in terms of what we're going to have to do. And I think we're really going to see how things are going to happen very, very rapidly, particularly because of the economics. People are going to look for jobs. And once they start looking for jobs and they see it's in green buildings, it's in green energy, here in Ontario, actually the federal government has offered to the school that my wife works for City College Al, which is a small college, sort of like a community college type. They do trades, okay? They do construction, they do biological, they do all sorts of medical, dental, all sorts of different types of trades. So how much emphasis is the government putting on that? Substantial. They just increased their budget substantially to build new buildings in order to house where people are going to work in that area. And I think it's really attracting more people into that area because I think they see that as being the new thing that's going to happen over the years.
So that raises, I have to go broach this subject. So you were born in New York.
Yes, I was.
You're a transplanted New Yorker.
Yes.
You're in Ontario, Canada. You've been there a lot of years. I think as long as I've known you, right?
15 years. That's about
no. So okay, I knew you before that. So I guess before you moved up there. So you have a dual perspective, probably a little bit, right?
Yes, I do. I'm still an American citizen.
So, but things are handled a little bit different there. I mean, this COVID response, I mean, obviously Canada is 1/10 the population in the United States, similar geographic size, but 1/10 the population. So it's more densely populated down towards our end of your country, or their country, because I guess you're still an American. But the response has been different, and it seems like Canada appears, at least statistically, to have done a better job of flattening the curve. And what has Canada done differently, and what kind of a perspective do Canadian? I'm just curious what Canadians' perspective is on how we're handling it. I guess I'm gonna go there because I want to hear from a Canadian perspective.
Well, let me give you the good news first, okay, about what we've done here in Canada, and then we'll go for the bad news about what we think about the United States and what they're doing. The good news is that very early on, in early March, there was a coordinated effort on the part of the federal governments and the various provincial governments to work together very closely. We have a conservative prime minister. I'm sorry, conservative premier in Ontario, Doug Ford. You might remember his brother. He used to be the mayor of Toronto.
Oh, I do remember him.
Yes, you do, don't you?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Anyway, yeah.
Anyway, so he's very conservative, Doug Ford. He was really trying to cut expenses because our deficit was astronomical. As soon as the COVID-19 hit, he worked very closely with the federal government, which is liberal, all right, under Justin Trudeau. And they have been working closely for the last 4 months on these issues. And that also applies to Saskatchewan, Alberta, all the way across the entire country. All the premiers have gotten together and worked with the federal government in a very close fashion. And they've come up with consistent, ways in which to deal with that. Now, with some little, jiggles here and there, Quebec is always a little bit different because they speak French. But then they also have a different way about social interaction. Most of their outbreaks have been in long-term care facilities and also in bars. Quite frankly, they have cafes and bars much more so than other places. But a consistent federal presence in this whole discussion has made it much easier for us to flatten the curve. And in actual fact, we're still in the process of doing phase 3, which is one stage away from doing complete back to what we were. With stage 3, we are still expected to wear a mask going into any type of public space, no matter where you are. We're still working on figuring out how to do restaurants, and not an easy situation, but we have.
That's challenging.
It is a challenge. And then summertime, you can do things out on the patios. You can do things. They actually close off streets where they have set up where people can eat and drink. So they've worked together, and there's been barely a dissent. So here's our conservative premier. He's working closely with the federal government. He's praising the federal government in many ways. A bunch of demonstrators have shown up at Parliament in Toronto, protesting that they want everything reopened right away. You may be familiar with those type of people in the States.
They usually have assault rifles here, though.
Yes, we don't have assault rifles, but so they were protesting. So he gets up and they ask him, "What do you think of it?" And he says, "You think I'm going to make my decisions on a bunch of yahoos?" Because they were standing out front. This is from the conservative side of it, okay? And so he knew what he had to do. Now, it may have helped. It may have helped that his mother was in long-term care too. That may have, been some personal.
But this should be apolitical, Don. I mean, this is science. This is it's science. I mean, but it's that's what frustrates the hell out of me, because this really shouldn't be a partisan issue. It should be, we've got a crisis. It's a national, international crisis, a world crisis, and we actually should be working together. All conservative and liberal factions shouldn't be fighting on this. There should be some form of consensus, I think.
I would agree with you, but I do think that at some point it's going to be fatigue. I think we're getting to that point right now, and here, but we have really flattened the curve. I mean, very few cases left in Ontario, a little bit more in Quebec because of what I was talking about. That they have some more difficulties controlling crowds in terms of Montreal and things like that. But it's all coming down to a lot less area of a problem. So what did we do? One of the first things we did is we closed the border. Okay, we said no.
You didn't build a wall yet, though. But I'm waiting for the northern wall.
We're thinking about it.
Yeah, you guys have a wall. Going across that border is a wall. What thing do you want? You don't get over there without. How many fish do you have? And what are you doing? And why are you here? You got a gun? No, you're not in. Yeah.
So that was one of the first things. Now, basically, as you've already pointed out, I am an American citizen, but I am a permanent resident in Canada. The problem was all my family's in the United States, as Bob knows. And all my vacations generally tend to be in the United States. I can't go to the United States and then basically try to get back into Canada. They put me on a 14-day quarantine, self-quarantine, but you're expected to stay in. And there is such a good civil attitude here that I don't think anybody would not do that. I have had some friends coming back from Florida in April, and they came back and went across the border. And as soon as they got across the border, they went directly home. And their friends brought them food. They did not go out at all for 14 days. That's Canadian. That's Canada. That's the way they do things, because there's that civil, as I said, attitude. Great way of doing things. So now
that's why people like Canadians, by the way. When you travel around the planet, I have a tendency to try to pretend I'm Canadian when I was traveling. I'd be scuba diving in other countries, like I'm from Canada, eh?
Yeah. Well, that may or may not work.
You're not truly Canadian because you haven't apologized yet. So that's the difference, right?
But I am sorry to tell you that that looking towards America, we just shake our heads. And there was a very famous artist, one of these opinion cartoon artists. He shows the beaver, which is the symbol of Canada, and they have a gate. Basically, he's pushing up against the gate, and on the other side, you see all these Americans waving flags or yelling at each other. They said, "We don't want you at this point. We don't come. We'll wait until you guys figure out what it is you're going to be doing." So it is not a good thing to look from here down towards the United States. We think you have made your share of mistakes, to say the least.
Well, our site that we have now that Bob's got up is about schools. Can you give us an idea about what you guys are doing about schools? Because clearly we didn't get that, and we are just forcing an issue that's only making it worse. It's showing up now on all these schools that people have to do self-quarantine, and they didn't do it right. So what are you guys doing with schools that's been successful?
Well, most of the universities are going to be starting out as virtual And so because they just don't see how they can do it otherwise at this point. They're still working on it. The elementary and secondary schools, the K through 12th grade, that they're looking each district making some decisions, but generally speaking, the rules from the Ontario Ministry of Education is we're looking to have in school or in class type of work. You can do that once you flatten the curve.
Right.
You see, that's the big difference. If you haven't flattened the curve, there's no way they would be doing this. But they are looking at it, and there are rules. There's the temperature check every day. There's going to be the wearing of the mask for all kids up older than 6. There's going to be teacher evaluations on a weekly basis as to whether or not they have any symptoms. They're working on separation in classrooms, which is very, very difficult, particularly for young kids.
Just by the design, right? I mean, schools are designed to pack them in tight spaces. So
they're talking about, maybe split sessions, which you guys might remember from our early days when the baby boomers went through schools. You would have a morning session for half the school and an afternoon session for the other half of the school. So they're talking about some of that and some of the larger, like Toronto, in here, Quebec, and things like that. So I think it's really key that you flatten the curve first. If you don't do that, then none of this is going to work. You're going to have more of a spread than you have had before. So that's the difference, is that we were able to do that. It was stringent. It was uncomfortable. It drove me crazy to sit around my house all day long. But, here I am trying to go into retirement, and I'm not even able to do much in the way of walking or go to the movies or, go see a bar or a restaurant I want to go to. So it was difficult, but we're making it through, and I think that will pay off in September, where we may have a few cases, but it will be a lot less than what we're seeing in the United States.
Well, your healthcare system has to play part of a role there to having a national healthcare system, right?
Yes.
Whereas people aren't going to shy away from actually getting treated.
Well, that's interesting.
Or are they? I mean, it's got to be a different perspective than a pay-to-play healthcare like we have here.
Absolutely. But keep in mind that one of the places where there was a lot of sick people with COVID-19 were hospitals. So a lot of operations, a lot of, elective operations, or even in some cases, needed operations were halted for a period of time. You weren't going to go see a doctor. You weren't going to go into the hospital. You still, if you were ill, you should be going there. But a lot of people were saying, I want the COVID-19 people to go to the hospitals. I'll stay here and I'll deal with the cold. I'll deal with the flu, whatever it might be. So there was a little bit of a switch, but that's changing now back again because the beds are freeing up. There's not as many beds available for, as they thought they needed to have. They now have beds available for ordinary operations or, as I said, elective surgery or necessary surgery. So that's happening. And again, you're right, because you're not paying for it, it isn't quite as difficult to say, I'll postpone it 3 months, because, I can deal with that for the 3 months and then I'll get it done. I hadn't been to a dentist until very recently for 6 months, well, about 5 months. And that was the first time I'm in there, and he had all the apparatus he needed to, prevent any type of exposure. He was talking about UVGI, getting that in there as well. And so he's putting in his money to do that type of thing because there's no other choice. And money of that is going to continue. That's not going to change. Going to a doctor's office is going to be different than it ever was before. You're not going to be sitting in a room with a whole bunch of sick people. All right.
We're going to see a lot more telemedicine here in the States too. Just Dr. John Charles, who we had on several months back, was actually my general practitioner. It was unheard of before this thing. He wasn't doing video teleconferencing for medical.
That's happening too, but not as quickly as it is in the States. But what I think that's a reflection of the fact that it is a bureaucratic system. So they have to get used to how do you charge for that, things of that nature. And that because the doctors still want to be paid. See, all doctors in Canada are paid through the province. So you have a different way of perspective in their regard. And when we talk to our doctor, he says, sure, I will see you, but you have to be here at 3:15 in the afternoon. You can't be here at 3:30. You can't be here at 3 o'clock. So you're going to have that kind of interaction that I think with the physicians now going forward. So yes, it is different, but I think the key thing was that they work together. The federal government and the provincial governments work together, and flatten the curve, which allows so many more opportunities to do other things now.
So a minute ago, you talked about that we are now 10 years ahead of our normal process. Can you elaborate on this or tell us, here's some of the things we learned from the COVID experience, or these things, this is how fast we just jumped ahead, and what are some of those? Right.
Well, I mean, I mentioned Amazon. I mean, if you follow Amazon in terms of its stock is just skyrocketing. But you see that type of, I mean, here in Ottawa, the Amazon people in 2018 built a 1.2 million square foot warehouse. Okay, in Ottawa.
Yeah,
okay.
Wait, but I'm gonna redirect you. Only let's talk about the industry, because we're all aware of Amazon and the monster. Okay, so okay, right.
I get what you're saying. I think the industry is moving ahead, because I think a lot of people in this industry are going to be doing virtual inspections. You're going to ask your client to show you where the problem is. All right, what are you talking about? I'm talking about this particular room, and I can't stand. I don't know what that stuff is growing on the walls. You're going to do a lot more virtual type of inspections in that regard.
Virtual triage is what you're almost.
Yeah. Do I need to be there? Not necessarily, but I can look at it for you and make a determination. I'm getting a lot of those types of phone calls, even though I'm retired. I see a change in the perspective about healthy buildings. I think people are going to want to have healthy buildings as part of what they look for in a new building. We used to call them green buildings or LEED buildings. It's not going to be just focused on energy savings. It's going to be focused on indoor air quality and the changes that people expect in order for them to go back. I mean, you're seeing the emptying out of office buildings in Midtown Manhattan. I mean, they're just, Google says you can work from home forever. Well, why would you ever go back to commuting? I did that commute in New York City, and it's not much fun. So you stay home. So the change then is, are we really protecting the people at home? How are their offices going to be operated? What kind of exposures might they be involved with? How do we inspect for that? How do we
the home
ensure?
office, yeah.
How do we ensure for that? How do you deal with workers' compensation? I mean, somebody could slip and fall and break a leg. I mean, how do you deal with that? Or that's part of occupational safety and health, Joe. So, but from an occupational health viewpoint, you're dealing with cramped spaces, probably not a great deal of ventilation. You're probably also dealing with, in some cases, some chemicals, things of that nature that you wouldn't necessarily deal with in an office building. That's going to be different. And then the whole school thing. I mean, one of my biggest clients when I was working as a consultant were the school districts. They were constantly having problems with indoor air quality. The teachers are complaining about that. Well, if you're doing more virtual, that may be reduced, or it may be increased if you're doing split sessions, because now you have teachers working in the morning and then you have a second set working in the afternoon. Where are they going to all fit in? What some of these facilities are just not designed for that kind of activity, and that will add up to more indoor air quality problems, more problems with people feeling uncomfortable rather than real sick in that regard. But comfort is a big part of what we're going to be dealing with going forward, and a lot of people are not going to be comfortable working in these types of buildings. We have to be in a position as an industry to provide certain information to people so they feel comfortable going back to their buildings. Otherwise, they're never going to go back. And now what happens? You have a collapse of real estate in the middle of our city. That's not going to that's not going to play very well.
But some of that, I think inherently some of that's going to happen, right, Don? Because I mean, jobs that don't require, like obviously the manufacturing jobs, the actual field service jobs where you have to go out, those are jobs where people can't telecommute and video commute from home. But a lot of administrative tasks and a lot of sales and all of that can be accomplished this way. So does it really, going forward, isn't there going to be a paradigm shift in commercial office space? Companies aren't going to need these gazillion square foot office spaces anymore because they're paying a lot more money for it. Look at the utility costs and everything. They're going to, there's actually going to be an inherent savings to the companies that would have leased that space. Now, I see where your problem is in the actual commercial real estate market could be devastating. I think you're going to see a lot of for lease signs up.
Well, and what is going to replace the offices? I mean, basically, are you going to be dealing with these folks that are doing telemarketing? Can you imagine that they'll take over a large office building and pile as many people in there as they can to basically operate telemarketing, have people calling? All of that is going to change in terms of the way in which people are going to operate. you know,
Well,
You just raised a horrible thought.
No. I think these commercial spaces are going to move into living quarters is what their easy transition is. That, you know, I don't want to commute. I'll just live downtown, and now I can actually live and work in my own facility, or I walk across the hall to a potential office space. I think you're going to see this combination of like, I live here and I have or rent or use an office area because my apartment doesn't accommodate that. So I think that these buildings have to readapt to you know, the living gap that's out there, and people want to transition either out of the city or they want to transfer somewhere where I don't have to deal with that commute or other challenges.
But isn't that going to even raise an issue like for design, now designing living spaces, rental properties, condos, even single family residences? It seems like now you're going to want to incorporate home office spaces that are somewhat insulated for sound, and, you know, so you don't have screaming children and barking dogs and you're trying to be on a conference call.
Yeah, well, that's going to happen, but it's happening 10 years before it was scheduled to happen. Now it's happening now. And I think that you're right. We're going to see different designs for new homes and retrofits for older homes. So as I already mentioned, my wife and I and the stepson, we all have our own computer space, all right, in different parts of the house. We're talking a 3-bedroom house. Where do you put everybody? You know, and that's going to be different in terms of what we do as an industry. How do we address those problems that people are going to have? Ergonomic problems with lighting, problems with noise,
ventilation.
Ventilation. Yeah, these are things that are going to be focused. So if they do what you said, Joe, and they start converting some of these buildings, office buildings, some of those buildings will be converted well. Some of them will not be converted well. And I can tell you from previous experience working in New York City, when they started to convert like places like Soho or Tribeca or some of these other areas, there were enormous problems with trying to do those conversions and get people feel comfortable with living.
Well, the mechanical systems, right? Because unless you redesign mechanical, which that becomes really like almost a gut rehab when you start ripping, you know, if ductwork is in case. That's a big thing.
There was a Wall Street Journal article about how architects are already changing their concepts. They were adding elevators so people have to wait less, whatever. Like that. I think that was a waste of money. Personally, people really aren't going to care about that, but they do want to know that their house is their environment, their unit is ventilated, isolated, and those are the kind of things that people want. So I do think though that we're going to be in this paradigm shift as like working from home and doing all that, but it will not last. This is not a permanent thing. We just like to get together. We like to, you know, be in the room with others. I think this is about a 2 to 3 year kind of condition, and we're going to be like, I need to get a regional office. I need to go somewhere so I can get with my coworkers. We need to get back to, you know, talking in the environment together. So I think it's a condition now that everybody's like, this is great, but as most things happen, we were like, no, I need more physical contact with my colleagues to interact quickly and live. So I think that there'll be a time when we're not going to go back to where it was, but maybe it's a separation of, you know, what more people live in one area that has a regional office facility and there's multiples of that or something. There's going to be something we're going to need to do to get back to physical contact.
I absolutely agree with you, but on a 2 to 3 day basis. There's no reason to have a 5-day basis in an office.
Right. But no, or just the ability to go do that. Like, okay, every Tuesday we all get together for 4 hours, right?
Exactly.
Whatever that is. That's right. But we need that.
But that's now makes multiple workplaces.
Yes.
Multiple workplaces.
That's true too, right? There's going to be more multi-purpose. But I think it's going to blur the lines a little. So for me personally, I've worked from home, you know, with my my consulting and remediation company over the years, IEQ Technologies, worked out of my home. You know, I have a commercial building in the back. It's a warehouse. You know, I'm fortunate enough that I have a 12 acre property. I can do that. And, you know, we had a detached 2-story garage that was converted to an office for the company. Now, since we've transitioned into the magazine, doing all this stuff, this office now, this 2-story building is now video studio. But it's literally across my driveway. So my commute is a 70-foot walk across the driveway into the studio.
Yeah.
And now I spend more of my time in the kitchen with a notebook computer. I don't even I don't even walk the 70 feet anymore. Well, unless I have to do the show. I tend to sit, you know, my wife's like, why do you always have to work in here? And you have to, you know, it's like, because I like looking at the birds and the deer and everything. It's a nice place to be.
Well, and in addition to that, the answer to the other situation, Joe, that you were talking about is we like to socialize. Yes, we like to socialize on a limited basis. In other words, we want to go out to where to see a play or go to a movie or go to the bar, go to a restaurant, but then we want to go home. Okay. We don't want to spend it all day out there. So there'll be spaces, they'll maybe be artificial to some extent, but there'll be places where you can go to Old Town or to, movie town or whatever you want to call it, artificial new spaces where we can socialize. But most of our time will still be back in the house, and we'll be working a lot out of the house. And that will probably end up being multiple workplaces that have to be evaluated for workers' comp, have to be evaluated for ventilation, for lighting,
because that raises a liability issue. Because if you're working for your employer from home, you're potentially open to a workers' comp thing, but in your own house.
Yeah, so those are the type of things that our industry will have to address in terms of inspections and things of that nature. And we haven't got there yet, but I think we will, and it will take some time. But I think the younger people are very much aware of what's going to be happening because they're already doing that for schools. I kind of think that they'll be moving into, why do I have to go to this office for 5 days a week? They're not going to do that. They're going to figure out another way to work.
So I have to pause this. It is that's my role. All right.
Yeah.
Is that time we try to do a quick...
I'd go forever.
I know.
Last week, although you may not have watched the recording from last week's show, but we did end on time. So I'm capable of looking at a clock without you. I just want you to know that.
Great. Okay, great. So at this time, we're going to do a quick wrap up. But Don, I'd like for you to talk. Let's bring ACGIH back into the role as to these are a lot of things that are happening. We just talked about occupancies and a variety of levels. Describe what ACGIH's role is and will be as we figure out some of these challenges.
Well, I think the main thing is still the TLDs, the threshold limit values. I think they've lasted this long, a little bit more than 80 years. So I think that's going to be something that we're going to be known for and continue to do. But I think we're going to be moving more into some of the physical and to the biological part of it as well. And I think that's going to change as time goes on because we have to. That's what people are going to be interested in. So ACGIH, I think, will progress along that lines as well. But, as I said, we're doing transition right now. We really never set up before to do virtual training. And now we've come up with this summer series of webinars. And we're going to eventually have to do the fundamentals of industrial ventilation by some kind of mechanism of that nature. So we'll figure it out, but it's going to take some time. And I think that's true for all associations. I'm just thinking the other day, what happens to the you've been to the ASHRAE winter show, Bob. Maybe you have too, Joe. How are they going to do this expo?
Oh, AHR Expo?
Yeah.
We're normally a 60 to 70,000 attendees.
Yeah. How are they going to do that?
Because the appeal, it's really hard to do with virtual. Because again, we produce online events with Healthy Indoors for organizations, smaller scale, obviously, 30, 40 vendors, not, 3,400 vendors or 3,000 vendors. I don't know how you do that in a virtual environment and make it anything other than just a madhouse.
And it's a big part of their income.
Yeah.
I think they're going to do a significant staging and a variety of other stuff, and hand out masks. People may not wear them, but and they're going to ventilate the heck out of that space.
But I think initially they're going online though, aren't they? Isn't it?
Well, they went online for their courses. They went online but you can't do that for the expo. It's a once a year thing,
Yeah. I mean, it's tough, right? But it's also, think about what that is though. That's 60, 70,000 people from around the planet all congregating together. It's a freaking petri dish.
Well, right now there's 250,000 motorcyclists in the Dakotas. So, I mean, right. So let's put it in perspective as to what's really happening here.
We've got a sheriff yesterday in Florida banned his deputies from wearing masks. They're not allowed to wear masks.
Or people coming into the office, they're not allowed to wear masks either.
Yeah. If you come into the sheriff's office in this county, and I can't remember where it is, you can't wear a mask when you come into the office. It's like, are you kidding? You're not allowed to.
So the one thing that I did get out of this, correct me, Don, is that the new bioaerosol assessment and controls will be a comic book. Is that what you had mentioned earlier?
Well, if only if I can use your face as one of my characters.
Sure, why not? Yeah.
I would love to. I would keep that book on my nightstand if I had Joe Madash's face on it.
I'll keep that in mind. No, I think that it's going to be an interesting transition. And I think that your type of show is going to be the thing that people are going to go to get more information as time goes on. So congratulations on your 7th year in the publication.
Isn't that crazy? Yeah. So, and did I mention that? So Don was the cover story of the inaugural issue of Healthy Indoors magazine back in August 2013. And this is the funny part. I last week erroneously told Corbett Lunsford that it was the anniversary of the magazine. And I actually checked. It was the anniversary of uploading the links to the internet, but not when we actually officially released. It actually is today. It was the 13th of August that we launched Healthy Indoors in 2013. So this is, woo, I should have had a birthday cake or a party popper or something. But, and here, we're still here. And so, and again, it's interesting, right? I mean, a lot of changes in a lot of changes, and then a lot of things have kind of stayed the same other than the pandemic.
We've just gotten older, but better looking. That's all.
Is that what it is? Okay.
Yeah, thanks for pointing it out.
Perfect. Perfect.
All right.
So, let's quick plug for Joe. Joe is involved with Hayward Score, which is a free. Well, tell us about it. It's a free home evaluation that you can do
Yeah,
online.
it's a free online assessment of your the benefits and risks that you may be living in. So it takes about 10 to 15 minutes, and we give you some personalized recommendations about how to improve ventilation. That's one of our greatest priorities, and some DIY, some things maybe a contractor may be able to help you with, or a good handyman. There's a variety of levels that are in there, but in general, just by taking the survey itself, you learn a lot about your home and how it could be, especially now, how much it could be impacting you or being a positive shelter in your life. So haywardscore.com, and there's lots of great resources there on make your own air purifier with a box fan and a filter. So some great information there. Thanks.
So Healthy Indoors magazine is as well as the Healthy Indoors show are available at healthyindoors.com. Obviously, we're free. It's a free digital monthly publication. We're releasing literally in a few weeks Healthy Indoors Global, which will be a quarterly digital publication. So soon, that's coming out soon. But Healthy Indoors magazine at healthyindoors.com. Constant news. We try to follow the news that's related to indoor environments. We have a back to school issue. The July 2020 issue, Healthy Indoors, is all about back to school. And of course, the Healthy Indoors show. Joe's doing a great job of flipping through this. You can see all the back recordings. We've been doing this show weekly live as a live stream since March, really since the onset of the COVID thing. We went from a monthly recording to a live thing, and we have a podcast, because if you can't bear to look at mine and Joe's and all of our glorious guests' beautiful faces, you can still listen to our golden voices as you commute, I guess, to the grocery store, because you're probably not commuting to work anymore. So with that, I really like, oh, there you go, ACGIH. So that's their website.
Come and join.
Can you join if you're not an industrial hygienist?
Yes, absolutely.
You'll take anybody's money, right? I'll take your money.
Well,
I can't join any organization that would have me as a member.
Yeah, that's a great Groucho Marx.
I know, right?
But yeah, we do take on, well, the main thing is that if you're interested, you should definitely apply. And there'll be a space for you in either a technical committee or just, be a member and get the great information that they send out. They have a weekly publication that is put out by Phil Rauscher, who's their technical director. So you can get that type of information on a weekly basis. And obviously there's additional publications and other discounts that you can get. All their books now are on PDF. You can get that from, I forget, techstreet.com. They'll direct you from the ACGIH website to TechStreet, and you can buy that and download that immediately.
Excellent. Well, I guess with that, it's time to bid adieu. So I wanted to thank Donald Weeks from coming to us from the Great White North, from Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. You don't really seem retired, my friend. I mean, with what's on your plate, it's like you're president of a freaking global organization. You're editing the revision of a book. It's like, yeah, okay, you're retired.
I don't have to worry about getting fed. That's the main thing.
And there you go. So that's fantastic. So it's always a pleasure to spend some time with you. And thanks again for joining us. So for the Healthy Indoors show, until next time, we'll be here next Thursday, 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, healthyindoors.com, and a host of other places. We're also streaming live on LinkedIn now. So for the Healthy Indoors show and Healthy Indoors magazine, I'm Bob Krell. Thanks so very much for joining us, and we will see you again soon.